Great. Thank you so much, everybody. And if folks are outside, please make your way back in. We're going to start the next session. I would love to invite my comrade, Stephanie Monroe, who will be moderating the next panel. She directs our African Americans Against Alzheimer's Network and does an amazing job in partnership with communities across the country and with me. So with that, welcome, Stephanie.
Okay, short people rule. Everyone having a good lunch? Okay, keep eating. Enjoy. Very happy to be doing this panel that will look at pop culture and dementia. That's what I'm going to call it. I'm going to reframe it. Pop culture and dementia. So let me go ahead and invite our panelists to the stage. First, I will have Marita Golden, come on up. Marita is a great partner of Us Against Alzheimer's. In a 2017 Washington Post magazine cover story called A Quiet Desperation, sorry, I can't talk this morning, maybe it's because I traveled all night. Marita Golden investigated the devastating and disproportionate impact of Alzheimer's disease among African Americans by chronicling the story and its effect on one family. The piece sparked intense dialogue, encouraged exploration, and resonated with many who are dealing with the reality of Alzheimer's. Marita is a veteran teacher of writing and an acclaimed award-winning author of dozens of books, including the critically acclaimed Wide Circumference of Love. Please greet Marita Golden. Next, we have Margarita Bermudez. Margarita is the manager of Latino services at Alzheimer's Greater Los Angeles, where she oversees the outreach and education efforts to the Latino community and families affected by Alzheimer's and related dementias. In this capacity, she develops culturally appropriate training curriculum in plain language, as well as meets the needs of with community partners and agencies to increase awareness. Margarita earned her master's degree in social work from the University of Denver with a social work with Latinos and Latinas certificate. She has over 10 years of work experience in working with the Latino community. And last but not least, we'd like to ask Loretta Vini to come to the stage. Throughout her life, Loretta Ann Woodward Vini, author of Being My Mom's Mom, has chronicled family events through journals, photos, and videos, seeking to capture every moment. After learning that her beloved mother, Doris, was the first female in the family to suffer from dementia, Loretta began documenting the details of doctor visits and recording people, places, and things as a substitute for lost memory. Loretta is a motivational teacher, speaker, and trainer, and has delivered speeches and presentations and conducted workshops throughout the United States and Europe through her first published work, and offers a wealth of encouragement. Please welcome Loretta. So, pop culture and dementia. Today we're going to talk about media arts, the performing arts, literary arts, and visual arts. These are really important and sometimes overlooked tools that we have at our disposal when we're doing research and outreach to communities, especially communities that are underserved. They really help to spread a full awareness of Alzheimer's disease in a way that public service announcements, documentaries, and public health fairs just cannot. They provide an insight, a three-dimensional insight, into the lives of families, of individuals who are impacted by Alzheimer's disease and beginning to make that journey. And so we want to talk about these tools, and this will be a little bit of a different panel because we're going to give each of the authors, each of the presenters, an opportunity to share a little bit of their work before we have some questions. So first, I think we have, I'm not sure if we're ready, let's go with Marita. Marita, do you want to read something?
Writing this novel, The Wide Circumference of Love, was something that I was called to do. Usually, I'm very clear about why I'm writing a book, fiction or nonfiction. But in the case of this novel, I had no idea why I was writing it. I don't have a family member who has Alzheimer's. I'm not a caregiver. Alzheimer's was over there. I was here minding my own business. And 100 pages into another book, I hit a wall, gave it up to a higher power, and 2 weeks later woke up, and this was the story that I had been called to write. And I couldn't figure out why until I, deep into the writing and the research, realized that I was a perfect vessel. Because during the research for this novel, which required 4 years of reading other novels about Alzheimer's, books like Loretta's from caregivers, spending time at a memory care unit, getting to know people with Alzheimer's, sitting in on their sessions where their memory was being activated, talking to wives, talking to husbands, put me in a place where I learned the essential lessons about life and death and love. And I'll remember that when I was doing the article for the Washington Post, I was talking to George Brandenburg, and we were talking about clinical trials. And in the midst of that, he said, you know, Marita, there's this other thing about Alzheimer's, and it's about love. And very few people write about the love that families have to call on, have to marshal and rediscover to go through the experience of Alzheimer's. And so after doing 4 years of research for the novel, then because I had found this crazy statistic in my research that African Americans were twice as likely to develop Alzheimer's, I knew that I wanted to write journalistically about that. Because as a novelist, my goal is to spark the imagination, the emotions, the deepest feelings of the reader, to turn fiction into truth and to make truth impossible to turn away from. As a journalist, I knew I could reach a different kind of audience looking for information. So this was a 5-year journey that has changed my life. I'm now an advocate. I speak at colleges, universities about my particular journey through this, as well as just developing more awareness in the African American community and also for women. I'm going to read the first page of the novel. The novel opens to the day that Gregory Tate, a successful Washington architect, is taken to live in a memory care unit by his wife because he's been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. And this is in the early mornings of that day that he will be taken to the memory care unit. The words hurl through his lips with a familiar bad taste. His fingers clutch the cool, round object filling his palm. He twists it and pulls. Releasing the orb that he no longer understands as a doorknob, he kicks the stubborn thing looming before him, kicks it hard over and over, then turns from its unmoving gaze. He paces in circles and straight lines, frenetic and relentless movement. This feeling, dizzying now, pumps into his blood, unearths a fury of words he cannot marshal, words that are slimy, slippery, burn inside him like a house on fire. The tattered calendar in his mind reads March 2nd, 1978, that day, a story that he sees in a million little pieces. There is no beginning, middle, or end to that day. There is only what he would say if he remembered. He's late for the meeting. He imagines Mercer cursing him in that slow-cured Virginia drawl. Where the hell you at, Slim? If I can get my black ass here on time, I know you ain't making me wait. Their proposal design an office building in the U Street corridor, still boarded up, on its knees and destroyed in the days after Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination, is finally being considered today. Caldwell and Tate needs a break, a big one. He has to make this meeting. He's practiced what he will say. This is the project. He is ready to go. A pain tightens his temples. To soothe the invasion, he rubs his hands over and over as though washing them and paces the wooden floor in slippered feet. the words now a mumble. Fatigue paralyzes each attempt to move, and he slumps on the floor as the words dissolve into a creaky whisper. There is wetness on his cheeks. His mind is the devil. Tears. He no longer knows what they are. Thank you.
Sure. Here? Stand up? Okay, I'll sit. So my median was a little bit different because I was trying to help. The hope is to outreach to the Latino community. So naturally, we developed a telenovela to outreach to this community. So the research has shown that there's two sources of information that the Latino community believes in. The comadre, the friend, the family member, the church friend, the neighbor, more than doctors and professionals. And the second one is the television, right? The telenovela, the dramatization, all of those things are more reliable than anything I ever tell them. And as we have heard, is that if people don't come to us, if people don't know the information, I do a lot of health fairs and people see Alzheimer's and then they move on. Like I have the cooties, like they're gonna get the disease if they even talk to me. And so one of the ways that we're trying to overcome that barrier is through something less scary. It's not Alzheimer's, it's a family, right? Let's watch this novella. Let's watch this really interesting novella. And like Dr. Marquez said in the previous panel, right, it's about the family, right? So what this is, it's a family based in East LA because it's a Latino family that is, the grandma is starting to show signs. And then what do you do when that happens? And because we're in the world of social media, we're in a world of really quick information, this is a 30-minute novella, right? So there's 4 episodes. They're about, the most is 8 minutes each, and it's boom, 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 let's go, really quickly, information. And the hope is to help outreach to the younger community, to the younger children through social media, through Twitter chats, and then on DVDs through community education, and then have a conversation about it. So this is the trailer of the novella.
Cool.
Thank you.
Happy birthday, mi Claudita.
Is everything okay, Mama?
No, I feel fine.
This isn't normal. Jackie, don't start. Senora Gloria, you have Alzheimer's disease.
Let me go.
No, I don't know.
I told you not to go to the doctor. Now they're scaring you.
Mother is sick. This is not fake. This is not pretend. This is not her getting older. She is sick.
Last time I came by, she acted as if she didn't know me.
People change when they get old.
Yeah, but they don't disappear.
This is going to be a long journey.
Well, my favorite story from the book is probably the signature story that my mom and I are known by. And when my mom was diagnosed, she was 77 years old, and she was about 81 or so when this story happened. And she's so healthy that I still, to this day, she's 88 now, but to this day, I still take her out, all kinds of places. So at the time that this story occurred, we were in a very crowded grocery store, and the line was really long. I have no idea what the issue was. And at the time, I was still allowing her to write checks. You want to have them be as independent as possible for as long as possible. So we're in this line, and my mom says, what do you want to know when you write a check? You want to know the date. So my mom looks at me, and she says, what's today? And I say, it's the 17th. And then we inch up in the line. So a few seconds later, she says, what's today? I say the date. You know where this is going. What's today? I give her the date. what's today? Finally, we get to the point where, you can lean on the counter and go ahead and put the date in, and there's all these people behind us, and finally we're getting there's one more person in front of us, and one last time she says, what's today? And I'm going to answer, but all the rest of the people behind us in the line, they yell, it's the 17th! My mother looks at me and she says, I guess I asked you that before, huh? And we laugh and high five. I mean, she had the best sense of humor ever. But you never know who's watching you. And I think one of the things when I go around the country, I've spoken more than 200 times about the book, and you never know what people are learning. And so everybody's laughing, and we're leaving, and I notice this woman's following us, but she's not laughing, and she's very close to tears, and she runs up behind me and she says, I need to talk to you. So we stop. And she says, I learned so much from you in this line. I'm so mean to my mother. I need you to tell me how you do that. She said, do you know how many times your mother asked you to date? I said, no. She said, 30 times. You never said, shut up, don't ask me that, I just told you that. Nothing. And you never changed your tone. She said, I need to know how you do that so I can do better. And so she, tears were coming down, and I said, my most honest answer possible, and that is, she is my mother. She asked me a question, and I answer it. I always try to pretend it's the first time she asks. Do I think to myself, please God, don't ask me that no more? Yes, but to this point, I'm happy to say I've not said it. So I think that it is, when I go to churches especially, they always want me to talk about the role of forgiveness and patience in caregiving. So that's our signature story, but she's got the best sense of humor ever.
So let me start with Marita, putting on your hat as a journalist. I know, because we spent a lot of hours talking about this issue over the course of at least a year, how much time and effort went into writing that article. And I think a lot of times when we pick up a paper or a news magazine, we don't think about the thoughtfulness that went into developing a piece that people will read and perhaps then toss away. I keep it in my file, though, and I bring it out. But tell us a little bit about what the role that you see journalists playing in helping us to raise awareness about Alzheimer's, and if you want to elaborate a little bit more on the process that you went through and the length of time that it took you to decide what went in, and dealing with editors and just all of that. Come out of the shadows, help us understand.
Well, it was a year, and I remember we started, because as I said, I could not forget that statistic. And what really drove me was that I would be conducting my research, I would talk to people in the field who did not know that statistic. I would be at the memory care center and would share that statistic with the director, and she didn't know it. I would talk to people in the field who were not aware of that statistic. And so that really made sharing that statistic very urgent. I've always been a writer who's written fiction, nonfiction, and who's seen myself as an activist. So there was no way that I was not going to write for my fictional audience as well as for the general audience. And so with that statistic, I came to you, and then you introduced me to John Dwyer, George, everybody that I needed to talk to, and of course Dr. Bird. The funny thing, I sent her an email in August and said, dear Dr. Bird, I know you're in North Carolina, and maybe at some point, sometime this year we could talk. She said, I'm at Georgetown University in Washington right now. And so we connected, and the beautiful thing about the article was that first we had to find a family, because everything is a story. We live through stories, we die through stories, everything in our lives that makes us feel alive is a story. So I did a lot of research with families who were in support groups, trying to find the perfect family. And ironically, when I found what I thought was the perfect family, this was a family where the mother and father had Alzheimer's. The 6 siblings were all marching in lockstep to do everything right. There were 6 siblings. 3 of them said, let's be the focus of this story. 3 of them said no. And one of them, who had gotten the test to see if she had, you know, a predisposition. She was a very well-known person in Washington. And she simply said to her siblings, I don't want this to get out. I don't want people to know that my mother and that our parents have Alzheimer's. So I had to start all over again. And I found another perfect family. A gentleman in Bowie, Maryland, whose wife was a former principal who retired and then began teaching, became teaching in the PG County schools. She developed Alzheimer's, and within 3 years, she lost the ability to speak. So this was a story of a man caring for his wife. And while I was doing the story, I went to visit her in the memory care unit. 6 weeks later, she died. So that this was the story of their journey. It was also the story of her death. And so there was that story, which was going to hook the reader. That was what was going to bring the reader into the story. Then the second layer was the science. And that's where my editors and I spent hours and hours really trying to write the ultimate story that would inform people not only about why African Americans are not in the clinical trials, but how this disease affects African Americans. And so that's where I talked extensively with Dr. Bird and her partner, Margaret Perrick Vance. And we drilled down into the science for a piece that we're very pleased got a really big response. And there were just so many people who were on my listserv, who are just my followers, who read my books, who said they did not know. So if nothing else, the article informed people about the threat of Alzheimer's disease.
Perfect, perfect. Loretta, I know that your book, Being My Mom's Mom, was a real journey for you. Tell us a little bit, though, and launching off of some of the comments that Marita just shared about storytelling, the impact of storytelling as a tool that caregivers can use, whether they publish it or blog about it or share it with people in the church. How do you think that helps potentially caregivers? And, you know, help us share some of the creative ways that they could do that if they're not going to seek publication, that they could use it in their own communities.
I think that storytelling is just so powerful. It's impactful, whether the experience is, you know, very similar to yours or, you know, very different. You know, writing the book was fairly easy for me in the sense that, as you heard in the introduction, I had written everything down anyway. We went to the doctor, I wrote it down. I wrote down what he said, I wrote down what I asked. Because, you know, when you're hearing news like that, you don't remember what they said later. You're so distraught, like, what did he say? Did he just say dementia? And you're trying to wrap your head around that. So everything that happens after that is a blur. So I started to write. But I was so shocked by the diagnosis itself, because as I said, my mother was 77, and I'm a fifth-generation Washingtonian. And so my great-grandmother lived by herself till she was 101. Cooked every day, knew all our names. So I'm thinking to myself at 77, do you mean you're not going to live by yourself till you're 101? So I was so, you know, woefully unprepared. I was like, let me write this, not only to capture the stories, but also to sort of insist that other people prepare earlier in families. Even if you've never heard of this disease, start asking your family members, where do you want to live? Who do you want to live with? How do you want the siblings to share responsibility so they don't try to kill each other once you get diagnosed? And so I think that was sort of the draw for me, and it was freeing and healing and all of those things to actually write it down. Because I think there's so much stigma sometimes. I think when people read other people's work or they see that amazing article that Marita did, I think where you're thinking is, oh, well, we don't have to be silent about it. Prior to my book coming out, and there was a Washington Post article done about it and our family too, but prior to those two things happening, I had tried to go out to churches to share the story, to talk about support groups, to try to get people to engage in the actual conversation. But I would talk to different pastors at some of the mega churches, and they would say, oh no, we're not impacted by Alzheimer's here. Well, the first 3 rows of people don't have a clue where they are. But okay, if you want to stick to that story, go ahead. So, but after the book came out, they were like, oh, when can you come and speak? Oh, now now we want to talk. But, and then several people said I gave them permission. I wasn't trying to give you permission, but I gave them permission to talk about it, that it was okay, that I was willing to get up on the stage and talk about all the things that, my mom did, including, pulling her dress up over her head once when we were in the CVS parking lot. Oh. And you're looking around like, oh my God, did anybody just see that? But then this woman came running up to me, because you never know, again, who was watching. She came running up to me and, threw her arms around me. She says, honey, I'm right there with you, because last week my husband dropped his pants in Walgreens. She was like, yes, you're not alone. This is a crazy disease. So we talked about the book, and she says, oh, I'm just so happy to be standing in this parking lot talking to you, because nobody seems to want to talk about it. So I think writing just is a permission for people to, keep going.
Excellent, excellent. You're absolutely right. It really does give people permission to acknowledge that they have those challenges and that people around them have that issue, that they don't have to sort of close their eyes and turn their head. I was thinking about the media and how I really feel like we are at a turning point in terms of, we've been engaged obviously in doing a lot of outreach to Latinos and African Americans, but you get the sense as I engage wherever I go, even the taxi drivers, I tell them what I do, and I have yet to encounter someone who didn't say to me, my grandmother died of this, or my grandfather, or whatever. I mean, it is everywhere, and just saying the word gives people permission to talk about it. Watching TV, from Junior Soprano to Meredith Grey, to Meet the Pains, to Still Alice, to The Notebook, to Forget Me Not, to Maid's Door. As we see an additional, prevalence, a growing prevalence of arts and media and literary articles and things of that nature that are written for people, real people, that's what we're doing. We're raising awareness, which makes, it sort of primes the pump for us to go in and then say, and here's what you can do about it. So, Margarita, I want to talk to you for a second about, because the novella is just beautiful, looks so professionally well done. You incorporated clinical trials messaging in that, so I want to hear a little bit about how you did that to make it accessible to people, and then tell us a little bit about the outreach that you're going to be doing at Alzheimer's Greater Los Angeles in terms of how you're going to push this out.
Yeah, so like I said, this is a very small novella, and we're trying to touch on a lot of different things. So the first episode talks about the warning signs, right? And then the second one is getting a diagnosis. And then it's disease progression, and then asking for help. So in the second episode, when they're talking about getting a diagnosis, we talk about the warning of not believing everything that you read, right? Taking those supplements, taking that ginkgo tea, taking that whatever it is, may not be the healthiest thing for you. And then at the same time, after the doctor gives the diagnosis, the doctor offers, there's maybe there's a clinical trial that she might be a good candidate for. Because we want to start that conversation, right? Like earlier we did the cell phone thing of, clinical trials equals hope. And we want to try to get that message as early as possible. So like a true telenovela, the whole episodes aren't available yet. Actually, every Tuesday they've been released since the beginning of Hispanic Heritage Month. So the third episode is available today on our website, on our social media, for free, and it's completely bilingual. It's completely in English and completely in Spanish. Although, of course, then it's, well, can you have the subtitles in English for the Spanish, and can you have it, right? Because of the reality of families, I need it in English, but my mom needs it in Spanish, and we need it in all the different languages. But the hope is, so we have it online for the younger, but the hope is for me to go out to the churches, to the community organizations, and have the conversation. And because there's such short episodes, the goal is, let's show the first episode and have a conversation about warning signs, about what that means, about what happens if you notice that on yourself, or if you notice that on a loved one. And then the second one, let's demystify how do you get a diagnosis, and also touch on clinical trials and what is that, right? We're fortunate enough in LA that we have USC and UCLA, two huge Alzheimer's disease centers that offer a lot of opportunity, but if our people don't go, right, like we've talked about all day, So let's have this conversation and let's try to demystify it then and there, and then let's move on, because this disease isn't going to go anywhere until we find a cure. So that's the hope of trying to help, trying to bridge that gap and make it less scary and honor the family, and that it's okay, but it's also okay to ask for help, and it's also okay to not know, and it's, right, just like you said, giving permission to the families.
Fantastic. We've got time for a couple questions, but before we turn to our questions, I see a friend of mine who came all the way up from North Carolina who's here. June, you want to come up and share with the folks here as a person with Alzheimer's, a person that you play in our play Forget Me Not. Share with us a little bit about what message you want them to know about Alzheimer's.
She always put me on the spot. When I wrote Forget Me Not, I asked God to take me inside the mind of a person with Alzheimer's, because I just didn't want to write a play for popularity. I wanted to write a play that was going to touch someone. So in the end, I come home as June, and I come home to a place that I've been living all my life, and I say, I want to go home. Take me home. You going to leave me here by myself? I'm going to sit in my chair. I just want to go home. And when I say I'm going home, you probably think I'm talking about dying. I ain't talking about dying. I want to go to a place where I remember people's names. Folks ain't fussing at me because I can't do what they want. So if you take care of people like me, I'm sorry. I don't mean to be a burden. I just want to go home. I just want to go to a place where I feel like I fit in. I had a daughter. I remember her name. Her name was Renee, because I call her all the time. I know sometimes she wish I didn't remember her name, because that's the only name I know. I had a son. I can't remember his name. And I look at his wedding ring, and I know I was married, but I can't remember that either. So if I don't remember your name, just know you're always in my heart.
We have time for a couple questions, Jason? Okay. Any questions or any comments? Yes, sir.
This is not a surprisingly shy group. I'd be curious on how we get you out more. You each talked about how you are getting out and talking, but how do we get you out every day of every year around everywhere? Because the way you tell these stories is really hits home. So what can we do to get you out more?
Well, let's talk about the black churches for a minute, because I'd like somebody to provide me as someone who I did a very successful presentation at Shiloh Baptist Church recently, and Sharon Sellers, who works with Sibley Memorial, their memory club, helped facilitate that. We had about 80, 90 people there, people who are suffering with dementia, people who just love stories, church members. But I have to say that that was the rare event. I have tried to offer myself to speak more specifically to African American churches, and I would like anybody to give me the skinny, the strategy, the 1, 2, 3. And I know that it's you show up and you have to kiss the ring, but somebody please break it down. 1, and I'm black, okay, and they won't let me in, okay. 1, 2, 3. Okay, and because that's this huge audience. I mean, I don't have a wonderful play like that. I have a compelling story. So the 1, 2, 3. Anybody? The answers are in the audience.
Well, I have an idea. We've been doing a play called I Remember better when what?
I paint.
There we go.
Book and a film called I Remember Better When I Paint. And we do it in the schools in the 6th grade. And we organize, I've been doing it especially in Chicago. And it's very great to have an intergenerational kind of project that you can share in schools or in brownie groups or wherever it is, or even in high schools. So I'm happy to share my list if that would be helpful to you.
I think that's a really good idea in terms of having more, like I said, reach. I think the other thing is too, just more partnerships, like we really heard, today. Just working with folks that can get you out there. I've been working with really small groups. I speak to a lot of families at memory care facilities and things like that. But yeah, I haven't had any success with doing that. And most of us who speak and write, a lot of us still work. But I happen to think this is kind of my calling, so I probably would work less if I, as George suggested, do this more. Because I think sometimes the small groups that we have, it can be more interactive. People feel more free to ask questions of the participants, but yet there's still a larger audience out there that you're missing. So,
I just want to speak in terms of the black church, specifically the mega church. And the bottom line is it's hard to get into those corners, but you can't go directly to the pastor. You have to have a relationship.
You do.
And the relationship is with that senior ministry. And so I work with Wake Forest Baptist Medical Center. We go around to a lot of churches doing lunch and learns. And so we don't ask to start a new event. Can we come to your event that's already taken place? That way we're not worried about attendance. So the seniors are meeting, they're already there, we're going to bring lunch. And then we tell them we're not just going to come one and done and be gone, we're going to come to you at least 4 times a year. And so now they look at us as opposed to coming, to take advantage of my parishioners or to come and, because, mega churches look at that like that sometimes. Now it's looked upon as a partnership. And so if there's a need with Alzheimer's, they quickly call Wake Forest, they call myself. So I would take the angle of going to the church to talking with a senior ministry and saying, you want to come doing one of their meetings and you want to present. And you want to build a relationship where you want to come 2 or 3 times a year and present. And before you know it, that church will tell another church, will tell another church, and before you know it, you're in.
That's the 1, 2, 3.
One question.
Marita, over here. After we worked on the article together that she wrote in the Post, and it was a fabulous experience. But when we talked, I could tell you the wheels were working on the stories you didn't get to tell. The next story you want to tell. Maybe for all of you, what's the next story you want to tell?
You mean that has to do with Alzheimer's? Yeah. I've been trying to write about Alzheimer's and love. Just only about Alzheimer's and love. Because my novel essentially uses Alzheimer's as a platform to dramatize a family in crisis, rediscovering tattered bonds and how they can be rebuilt. But there were so many families and people that I interviewed who told me amazing stories of new definitions of love, resilient love, love tested and proven true, that I came to understand that Alzheimer's is like much of what we experience in life, a deeply, deeply spiritual experience. It's a disease masquerading as a spiritual experience. And that is the story that I think that we talk about the research and everything, but that's a very powerful story that more and more of us in this field, I think, will begin to tell. And I've been, I've made some attempts and written a few things, but it's going to have to gestate a while because it's such a powerful love that enables people, families where kids who for years have been missing in action. You hear the stories, well, I'm the only one who's doing anything. Okay, that's the story we know. But then there's the story of the kid who was missing in action, who comes back and completely redeems themselves in the face of the most horrible thing their mother or father has ever been through. And those are beautiful, vital stories that are going to allow us to talk in a different way about Alzheimer's, to expand the conversation. So that's the story that I'm trying to figure out how to tell.
Well, I guess we're out of time. So our panelists will be around. If you'd like to grab them, we'll be happy to talk with you. And if you want to get more information about some of the things that they have produced, I'm sure they'd be happy to share.
And the Washington Post article was on June 4th of this year. And anybody who would like to read it can read it on my website, maritagolden.com, or contact me and I can get your copy.